Hi, I'm Reed Roosevelt from Zoom In Online. I'm here with Jason Kohn. He made a film called MANDA BALA, which for me made this entire Sundance Film Festival worthwhile. If I had just come and seen this one film, I would be a very happy guy. So this is a huge talent, and it's always exciting to meet somebody new, to make a discovery. So it's fun to be here today.
It's a movie about the connection between large-scale political corruption in Brazil and street violence, told through the story of a frog farm and a plastic surgeon.
Now, you worked for a while with Errol Morris.
As did you.
I worked for a long time with Errol Morris. What was some of the most important things you learned from him?
Errol doesn't compromise. Errol does exactly what he wants to do and doesn't stop fighting, and is crazy and is awesome and is brilliant. And I love Errol, and I love Errol's films, and that's why I went to work for him, because he's my favorite filmmaker. And most of the time I was just trying to listen to every single thing that he said. And he's awesome. And sometimes he can be hard to work with, but the total sum is that Errol is a real genius, working in a field where he was able to excel. And that happens very rarely, I think, in the world. And being in his presence was amazing, And he really nurtured the movie. He was kind of the godfather of the project, and was really unbelievably supportive. Him and Julia, his wife.
Is there a particular film from Errol that you feel connects to this one?
Well, the beginning, it started off, I would describe it kind of in a fast, cheap kind of way, because it's, disparate stories, working together. I like to, think of that movie, there's no single point in the movie that anybody can identify as the climax, but for every single audience member, there's a point of, synthesis where they just get it. That was something I wanted to do with MANDA BALA. But the other thing is that when he made Thin Blue Line, which is a masterpiece, right? I mean, it's one of the greatest movies of all time. He made a nonfiction noir film. It's a movie that used the conventions of Hollywood cinema. And I wanted this to be a nonfiction science fiction film, and that was really important. And it was Errol's idea to shoot an anamorphic Super 16. Like, he recommended I Stand Alone, the Gaspar Noé movie, and he said it was the cat's pajamas. I'll never forget it. And anamorphic Super 16, and it worked out. I mean,
when you talk about Errol suggesting the Super 16 anamorphic, it made me think about his first film, Gates of Heaven, where he told me he was shooting it in 16 millimeter, but he wanted it to look like 70 millimeter. So, I mean, what's the purpose of making a documentary and giving it that kind of having the desire to giving it big production value?
I love everything about Errol, right? And I think he made a decision in 1980 or in the years up to that film that and we've never spoken about this, but this is the way I understand it, that documentaries are part of cinema. They're part of movies. They're part of a tradition. It's not a separate form of storytelling. It's not a different form. It's just another genre. And I think that one of the things that we were fighting against, and I was fighting against, was this current trend of video documentaries, which makes documentaries a lot more accessible, but it kind of takes. I think the market is a little bit confused. It's another conversation altogether between television and theatrical documentaries. But Errol understood very, very early, that he wanted to make, I think, movies. Movies, part of a tradition of, the movies that you go and see as a child inspires you to make movies as an adult. And I love movies, obviously. I mean, everybody here does. And I wanted it to feel like a movie. I wanted it to be a movie, and not simply a documentary.
You're not like one of the hundreds and hundreds of Errol clones. The movie opens up, it could be the opening to Dirty Harry. It comes out with this incredible bang, where Errol's films tend to be more meditative.
Well, I think a lot of people think of Errol's movies as kooky characters in America, like this thing of Americana, and that's what I think when people go out trying to make an Errol style movie, they just concentrate on the characters. When I think of Errol's films, I don't think of the characters as much, or I think of the characters just as much as his production value. So the way that I think that I learned the most from him, it was not necessarily about interviews or characters or that stuff, which I did. I think I learned a lot, but it was much more about his attention to production value. And that's where I feel like Errol's influence was the biggest. And not necessarily what we were shooting, but how we were shooting it.
How much did this film come together in the editing? Because in Errol's way of working, editing is a period of discovery.
Yeah, the same way. I mean, that was also right out of the Errol Moore's book. It was, going down with a very simple idea. The rich steal from the poor, and the poor steal from the rich. There's an invisible war going on, and these are two industries that we can kind of figure out how to, show that. But that's not a story. That's something else. It's an idea. It's it's fodder for themes and and metaphor, but it's not story. And the person who helped really nail the story, the person who single-handedly most responsible for helping me figure out the story, was Doug Abel, who was one of Errol's editors, and who worked on The Fog of War and First Person and lots of other stuff. And I learned more about trying to tell a story with Doug than anybody else. Boil down the themes and create the story. But it was 5 years of work, and we didn't have an ending after working with Doug. So I had to go back down to Brazil, get the kidnapper, get the interview with Jodar himself, which was a fluke that it even happened. And then I had a final editor, and we polished everything and put it together. The story was created in the editing, without doubt.
Tell me about Jodar Barbalho.
Barbalho.
Yeah.
He's a royal son of a bitch. I mean, one of the prime assholes of our time. This Sundance fund was set up to create industries in one of the poorest places in the world, in the Amazon. Billions of dollars, all money from Sao Paulo, actually. This is something we couldn't get into in the movie. It's a little bit complicated. But huge corporate tax incentives. The fund, upwards of billions and billions of dollars. Jodar was the president of the Senate. He was the person who appointed all of the supervisors for this fund. So when this fund was just supposed to, a small rural entrepreneurial business owner was going to go to this fund and get half the money to start a farm. And it would have been wonderful, because that's a lot of farms, it's a lot of jobs, it's a lot of production. Those projects were all fake. They were overvalued, they were totally fraudulent, and all of that development money that was going to help these people, literally in the pockets of corrupt politicians and greedy businessmen. And
Tell me about how you found the kidnapper.
my dad lives in Sao Paulo, and he has a friend who's a cab driver. And so he was asking, we were just bullshitting, and he was saying, maybe I can introduce you to somebody. I was like, yeah, whatever. And I had been 4 months, and I know this guy, never asked. And after 4 months, and he was like, I deliver packages every once in a while, and drugs and guns. And I got a phone call that night from the guy. He's like, what do you need? I said, I need to do an interview with somebody who's kidnapped somebody. After 4 months, I would have, taken your garden variety, kidnapper, an ATM kidnapper. Go to the ATM at night, and they're called flash kidnappings, and then in the morning again. But this guy, he was like, yeah, well, you got that. What else do you need? I was like, what about violence? And he said, yeah. I mean, I've pulled out fingernails, I've cut off ears. The second the word ear came out, I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, this is the movie. And then the final link was, where's your family from? And he's like, my father's from, the Northeast. And that's what the movie's about. And it was dumb luck.
One thing I found kind of staggering in the movie is that he claimed that he was giving the money that he was getting from kidnapping to his community. Is there any truth to that?
Absolutely. No, it's actually very common. He is literally paving the streets of his favela. He had already paved one, and he was going to pave another one. I mean, they're building a sewage system, and it's huge. And he's the only recourse for these poor, disenfranchised people who have nobody, looking out for them. The level of survival is menial, and he's just. I don't want to make him into he's not a good guy. I mean, he's a brutal killer. He has no respect for human life whatsoever. But at the same time, the world is a complicated place.
Last question. I want to ask you about the prevalence of kidnapping in Sao Paulo and the entire industry that's been built up around that.
I mean, the amount of business the industries that revolve around crime, or there's a big theme about this. The big theme in the movie, the frog farm being an industry that revolved around corruption just as much as the plastic surgeon, the bulletproof cars, and the helicopters. They are they are making tons and tons of money off of people losing their ears and people losing their fingers and people families being destroyed and all of that stuff.
Thanks very much.